Welcome back. This is the donor engine that I'm going to be using in my rebuild. So the intention with this engine is that at bare minimum, I'm looking for a usable block and crank. So the plan is to tear this down and figure out what's usable, what's not. As I said, it's a $300 engine. It's really cheap. It's extremely cheap, even by Australian standards. So typically, you know, a good working engine in Australia is about $2,500. A blown engine might be, like, you know, no compression, might be closer to $1,000. So for this to be $300, it's either an incredible bargain or, you know. I guess before I get started, I can tell you a little bit more about what I do know about the engine. I have no idea about kilometers, what car it came out of. It's a DE non-rev up, so you know it's a 2003 to 2004. That's pretty self-evident, but I don't know what kind of life it's had, what kind of life it's led. I'll give you a better look around the engine, and it is in very poor condition in terms of like visually. It's got oil leaks everywhere, which isn't too unusual. But the big factor in why it was as cheap as it is the timing chain cover is broken. So that was due to the previous owner having an accident in his car, picking up this engine effectively to get a good working timing cover to put on the engine that he's still using. So he swapped his old timing cover back onto this, and so this is the busted one, and I'll show you in a little bit more detail there as well. The other thing I realized after I'd bought the engine was that it's also missing all of the, or most of the bolts for the timing chain cover as well. So I'm gonna have to source them, potentially a timing chain cover as well, depending on what I decide to do with the engine that's still in my car, which is still in very good working condition. So it'll be a decision around what components I take off that engine, whether I need to or not, or whether I can build an entire engine in isolation from that one. Although I do know that the cams at some point will have to get swapped over because I bought them literally for this build. So without further ado, let's start the teardown. All right, I want to quickly cover off what you're going to need to tear the VQ down in terms of sockets at least. It's a Japanese engine, so you know you're going to be dealing with 10s, 12s, 14s, 17s, and it's 19 for the crank bolt, pulley bolt. I've got some impacts there that I've used as well. Good to have handy. 5mm Allen, that's for taking off the cam chain tensioners. This 8mm hex Allen, I don't remember, but I had it out, so I'm pretty sure you need it somewhere. The 10mm is for your head bolts, and this bad boy, which was the 12mm, that's for your freeze plugs. The obscure ones now are for the rod bolts and the main cap bolts. So for your main cap bolts, you've got a E14 Torx. Keep one of those handy. And for your rod bolts, this is the 10mm 12 point. All right, let's take a closer look. The timing chain cover is missing some components. Obviously I've still got mine, so if I need to source some others, I'll do that. But here's a better look at where the actual problem was and the reason that it was sold to me. So it's obviously got a busted, unusable timing cover, which is fine. But the important part is that, touch wood, although it looks disgusting, the upper oil pan actually looks to be in pretty good condition. Now the things that you'd be looking out for here are a crack in the oil pressure sender, part of the casting. So touch wood again, it's like I've had a pretty good look, it all looks fine, but that's a pretty typical area that people go and over torque the sender, and it'll crack that part of the casting. What else? There's no other obvious signs or issues on that upper oil pan, so that's good. It's good to have at least a spare one of those. Not you can see it well from here, but the rear main seal actually looks like it was replaced not that long ago, or not long before it was taken out of service. There's been some maintenance done on this car. Yeah, so here's a look at what I was talking about earlier, where anywhere where there's coolant galleries, it's rust. Very rusty. Thankfully, it's you know, it's an aluminium block, aluminium heads, so it's easy enough to clean them out. I'm not worried about corrosion in that regard, but yeah, obviously something that needs to be cleaned. Something else I can tell you about this engine is that when I went to go and inspect it, it turns over. So that was the first thing. At least it turned over. It definitely isn't a, you know, broken rod or anything like that. But I also pulled all of the plugs and inspected the cylinders, so using a camera. So they actually all looked pretty good. I couldn't see any sort of obvious marks on there. So between the engine being able to turn over and the cylinders looking pretty good, that was really the reason that I said yes to picking it up for as cheap as it was. All right. Let's start with the timing cover, because it's already come off before. It's only being held on by 3 bolts right now. And we want to see the carnage underneath, if there is any. So, good place to start. Now that is pretty varnished. Yep, that's pretty nasty. It's slightly less varnished here than I expected it to be, although it's not great. Yeah, no real surprises here. Much the same as the other side. I think the tension is more or less off here, but either way it's... Yeah, that's still got some tension in it, doesn't it? Yeah, I don't like my chances. I think I'm just going to buzz this off. Hope for the best. 10. Wish me luck. Good luck, everybody. Ah. Taking a look at these gallery gaskets, they look to be fine, which is common for DEs. DEs aren't the ones known for blowing their gallery gaskets. That's more of a HR thing. So, not surprisingly, these ones look fine. Like, this varnishing is unreal. Looks like I'm missing a few bolts from the lower oil pan as well. Terrific. Now this looks like it's going to come straight off, I'd say, the last owners. Yep. What do you know? Oh yeah. There we go. It's a little bit of forbidden glitter in there. Alright, might as well take the upper oil pan off. You better believe that's about 100 times easier taking that upper oil pan off out of the engine bay than when it's in the engine bay. Because my God, that took me forever last time. So, the trick with getting these things off, because they get stuck, this thing is, I mean, even just with the seals in there, they will tend to get stuck in there anyway. They're difficult to get out. In my case, it's varnished up pretty hard, so it's even more kind of stuck to and sealed to the rear timing case. So there are 10mm bolts that actually put it in there, that hold it in. The trick is, they actually give you these 12mm threaded holes on the outside. So I've just taken a couple of 12s from this spot here, which was one of the timing chain guides, and voila. Simple as that. That's nasty. Yeah, I mean, look, consistent with everything else we've been seeing so far, that's a decent amount of wear on the cams themselves. And I expect the journals underneath to look pretty similar. Eight, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now I'll take on a little tour shortly, but it's very strange. Like, as bad as the heads, the cam journals, the cams, the lifter buckets, as bad as they all look, like they've clearly been worn down, the cylinders look fantastic. I can't see any like really obvious signs of scoring, yeah, in terms of that up-down scoring. So I'll just give you a quick demo of it turning over. Nice and smooth. All right, let's get a good look at this. All right, let's see if we can do a little demo of these cylinder walls. All right, so there's a tiny bit of vertical scoring there. Otherwise, they're generally looking very good. Some of you astute people might have noticed that there are a couple of extra gears sitting on the end of the crank right now. They're actually a couple of the exhaust cam gears. The reason I've done that is that I don't have the balancer for the engine. So when I bought it off the guy, it was sitting in a pile of stuff somewhere. I forgot to get it anyway. Not that it was really all that necessary. But the reason I've got a couple of cam gears on here with the crank bolt is that you do not want to put that bolt in and wind it down without something in there. So like, you know, the balancer would normally be in between the two. If you don't have anything on that crank and you try and screw down the bolt straight into the crank, it will bottom out. I know because I've done it. And then you need to get a tap set and just clean up that thread, because and that's pretty scary for someone that was still very new to engines at the time. So don't do it. I mean, that's not amazing, but that's pretty good. Journal looks respectable. Give it the old fingernail test. For my admittedly inexperienced knowledge about conditions of journals and what's usable and whatnot, I think this is pretty good. I think it's usable. Maybe it'll need a polish, but maybe not. Anyway, we'll cross that bridge. I think so far so good. This should do it, hopefully. Just got to get it past that bit of carbon build up at the end of the cylinder. and we're good. All right. About the same, obviously, not surprisingly. Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of wear in there. I think this has had, as I mentioned previously, some very infrequent oil changes. As long as the crank and the block survived, that's all I care about. The rest of it's getting replaced. While we're here, just show some of the wear that the pistons had itself. So you can see, obviously that skirting material's been wearing off on the side. Some vertical strokes, lots of carbon buildup. So, I mean, this is my first proper full engine tear down of one of these. I know using a scope, I've looked at the top of my pistons in my engine. They're a little bit cleaner than this, but it's not, I don't think that's unreasonable. But yeah, the oil ring has been pretty gunked up. Definitely wear on the sides, but I'm going to go and say nothing major and probably fairly typical of a 20-year-old VQ35DE. Number 2. Not dissimilar, maybe a little bit more worn. Again, nothing scary. Yeah, nothing to see here. More of the same. Okay. This one's looking a bit more cooked. Yeah, that's definitely through a couple of layers there. Yeah, that's great. Really good. So far, doing really well here. Yeah, just crank by hand now. Insert crank joke here. Oof. Alright, so top of this bearing was taking a pounding, whereas it's interesting because the underside looked great. So that's gone through several layers of coating there in metal, and yet the journal still looks good. Okay. A little bit of extra scrapey. Looks fine. Ooh, Lucky Last has what's clearly the most obvious scoring on here. Damn. Yeah, so it's for sure taken a piece of debris in there. What does that mean for the journal? Evidently not much. That honestly doesn't feel any different to any of the other journals so far. So, thank God for bearings. Oh, fuck. I mean, heck. Yes. So, at some point, and look at that, it's been wearing on an angle. That's interesting. I need to speak to some experts about that. I wonder if that's a thrust bearing issue, maybe. We'll take a look at them shortly. But yeah, you can see, I'll bring back this thing. So at some point, a piece of debris has no doubt come in via the oil gallery, spun in there between the bearing and the journal for what looks like about 2/3 of a trip, because it's done a full half circle here and then just this portion here, and then I guess either got dug in, maybe I'll take a look at that, but yeah, it looks like it could have. So this little piece of debris has gotten dug in here and implanted and just stayed because, or otherwise it was ejected, but I think more likely that little end piece there is where it's laid to rest. Get this dirty old oil pan seal off. No doubt that's the original. I think this was actually replaced fairly recently. It's definitely not the original, because there's RTVing this up, and it's because it's so easy to get wrong if you don't take off the upper oil pan. It's very easy to get leaks out of it. So after the fact, like, you know, people start getting slow leaks, and then you've got to try and plug it from the outside with RTV, which does not work, not as a permanent solution. That's fine. Alright, number 2, bit of wear. Oh yeah, no, it's got some fairly uneven wear actually. And that's why the pros do it. Alright, here we've got our thrust bearings as well. Now, I don't know what I expected to see, but they look fine. Ooh. This one looks a little bit sketchier. Ooh. Alright. It's the first one I've seen that's down to the copper. So, yeah, I mean, look at the more uneven wear. and it started to dig into that side, which was the transmission end, flywheel end. Someone's had a bit of fun with this. Let's see if we can get a decent look in here. Now, particularly this main journal, because this is the one that had the most wear. Now, this is the first time I can actually feel, yep, so that there is giving me some resistance on my fingernail. It's the only one so far. So there's definitely been some wear on this one. Clearly it's a raised up area where you've got the oil channel that goes through the bearings. So through the center here is a raised up area, which means these areas are a touch lower, and you know, you're only talking like a couple of thou in terms of the difference in depth, but that's where it's clearly taken a bit of metal off that journal. So, well, it'll be over to the machinist. Here we can see that the top bearing on the main journal is actually okay. Look, it looks fine, but all you need to do is look at what would be the underside, so the one that's taking most of the forces, of course, as the pistons are pushing down, and it has worn quite unevenly, I might add, but down to the copper on that end. So I don't know, is that flex in it? Possibly, or just the fact that it hasn't had an oil change and shit was going through there, and it just naturally gravitates towards this bottom cap bearing. Similarly then though, the front journal bearing has worn sort of on that end as well, except it's the top side. So I wonder if that means, you know, you've got the whole crank is sort of wanting to push in that direction, so up at the front, down at the back, which kind of makes sense the way it's worn. Now, in terms of completely tearing this down, the only thing left really would have been to remove these tensioners from the front. That's the tensioners for the cam gears, the cam chain. You just need a 5mm Allen to undo those. There's a couple of bolts in there. Oh, look, I think I've got this one on detached. Let me show you. Oh yeah, so I ran these cam gear caps, the front caps, through my sonic cleaner, gave them a bath. Actually came out pretty well. I was curious, but it does have that like cloudy grey colour that you get when you run it through like a bit of cleaner. So it's not quite the vibrant aluminium you're used to. Anyway, yes, so 5mm Allen bolts, and that gets them off pretty easily. So I've taken the lifter buckets out. I put them in storage because I wanted to keep them handy for when I needed to potentially size them for my other heads later. After going through that whole process, I figured, bugger it, I'm just going to leave them in this head and I'll just cover it up, even though it is starting to get a bit of dust and stuff settling on it, so I need to fix that. I am going to get these heads looked at. It is mostly surface wear, I think. I don't think they're terrible. It's just more wear than I wanted to see, and certainly it's a little bit more compared to the heads that I have in my engine currently. But you know, I'm not going to leave up to my own opinion. I'm going to take it to a machinist and have them look them over as well. My bigger concern, of course, would just be the valve's ability to seal. Again, I'm really not concerned. I think if I've got a good pair of working heads here, that's great. I can potentially, I'm considering now rebuilding a second engine from the parts that I've got, and I can sell that. But in terms of like having the best heads out of the two pairs I've got, they're going to be on my other engine, so it's not really that bad. Machinist turns around and says these are perfect or close enough, then yeah, then I'll probably just end up using these on the build anyway. Okay, so where does this leave me now? I've got what I think is a very usable block. I'm pretty sure the crank is good. Again, obviously I'm going to have to get a machinist to look over both of those to make sure they are usable, and I'm not kidding myself. Same thing goes for these heads. I don't think that they are as in poorer condition as I originally thought they were. They've got some light scoring, but I don't think it's that bad. So I'll have a machinist look at those too. Obviously check for, if he thinks they're still usable, then check for valve seating, those sorts of things. I'm not planning on upgrading the valves for a street build with still reasonable horsepower. The stock heads and valves are supposed to flow very, very well. So it's just chasing sort of extra costs for probably not a lot of benefit there for what I'm doing, at least anyway. So we'll see if they're okay. The other part to point out as well is, I've still got this very good condition, usable engine that's in my car. The plan all along was to try and build a swap engine outside of the car and then just do a straight swap. But that may not be possible. I may end up having to still use the heads off my engine, maybe some other parts of my engine as well, we'll see. But I think for the most part, I'm going to be able to at least build a short block outside of the engine, and then we'll sort of go from there in terms of what else I need. And the other thing to point out as well is that, the engine I bought, it again, $300, like, it really has sort of paid for itself. I've got an upper oil pan that's in perfect condition and dirty, but, it's still very good condition. They retail for about that price brand new anyway. Plenty of other little parts that have come out of it too. So, and I'm really not worried if some of the other parts that I've come across, obviously things like the timing chain cover, I can pick them up in some places. I don't think the costs are really going to blow out of control there. So I think all in all, this has worked out really well. The engine has been a good find. And will very likely form the basis of my build. But I'll certainly circle back once I get the information from the machinist. Now, the other thing is, I'm not going to go into it in much detail here in terms of like showing what I've got in this episode, but I have very recently come across a booty of sorts of somebody else's unfinished project parts. So they're all brand new. Somebody had been stockpiling them for several years on a project they didn't follow through on for their reasons. But it means that I've got gaskets, seals, block guard, rods, most things you're going to need to be able to rebuild the engine, sensors. What I don't have are things like pistons and some of the fancy stuff like the billet oil pump gears, a girdle, and a few other bits of it, like the bolts, like the ARP studs. So so there's still a little bit to purchase. I reckon I've got about 2/3 just from what I bought alone. But yeah, then there's about a third of it left that I still have to source from probably the States. So yeah, that's it. That's wrapping up the teardown. Gives you a bit of an idea of where I am going. But yeah, that's it for this episode. So thanks for joining, and see you next time. It's like no cars all fucking day.